Ladies and gentleboys, we assume if you're watching this, you're an enthusiast. So, to you, nothing says sign me up for 10 years of debt like a compact sports sedan. So, we have the quickest versions of the 3 quickest compact sports sedans in the world. That runs on dead dinosaurs. This runs on elontricity. And that one runs on golf. Plus, it has a master race mode. So we know which one thinks it's superior. My question is, which one's quickest? This video is brought to you by the Haggerty Drivers Club, which includes a subscription to our award-winning magazine, 24/7 flatbed roadside assistance, and far more. Join or get more info at the link below. Let's start with the newest car here, the Mercedes-AMG C63 S E-Performance Turbo 4MATIC Plus plug-in hybrid, whatever. Look, Mercedes invented the V8 sport sedan category many years ago and has now abandoned it all for a 4-cylinder. The 4-cylinder that makes 671 horsepower. For perspective, that's 53 more than a McLaren F1 from a 4-cylinder. Thanks in part to a turbocharger sized appropriately for a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It's got all the boost plus a bunch of electric motors, including one in the turbo to get 469 horsepower out of just 2 liters. Then there's another 201 horsepower straight from electricity. The combined 671 horsepower routes to all 4 wheels, with the engine using a 9-speed automatic without a torque converter, and the rear motor using another 2-speed automatic. This is, I do declare, the most complex and convoluted powertrain ever put in any production car ever. And so this is, I do believe, the most obese compact car ever. It weighs 4,800 pounds, which is the same as a 4-cylinder Jetta GLI, which is the same size, plus 3/4 of a Miata. That also makes the Mercedes 860 pounds heavier than the segment benchmark, the very, 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 very fast BMW M3. And that is the very fastest of them all, and the most powerful. It is the M3 CS. For some $30,000 more than a base M3, you get some carbon trim bits to knock off 1% of the car's total weight and 70 extra horsepower. The venerable twin-turbocharged, perennially underrated S58 straight 6 makes 543 horsepower. Right, 543 horsepower. Sure, Jan. Anyway, the transmission's an 8-speed, drive is all-wheel, and unfortunately, the front end is still very much...
What's up, Doc?
This is where things get really wacky, because everybody knows that electric vehicles both cost more and weigh more than combustion cars. And that is not the case for either of these things. The Tesla Model 3 Performance costs $30,000 less than the Mercedes. And by the way, less than half as much as that M3 CS. That is before the EPA gives you a tax credit to stop burning dinosaurs big enough to buy a used BMW. And by the way, those 2 cars weigh within 1 passenger of each other. Not a big guy, but like a skinny European passenger. If you ask the EPA, the Tesla has a longer range than the M3 does, which is nuts. And for one of the first times in history, a US spec car makes more power than the Euro spec one does. Thanks to some battery cell differences, the US spec Model 3 Performance makes 510 horsepower. 50 horsepower more than the one you might have seen drag raced by a very smiley guy who told
like this.
Anyway, an EV that weighs the same as a combustion car, costs half as much and has more range? I can't keep up. What is this world coming to? And you know what else can't keep up? Basically any other car with these guys. So it's time to race them and find out what is the new world order. .543 horsepower, my big fat derriere. That thing is a monster. It's not just fast, it's supercar fast. That is 0.3 of a second off the time set by a Ferrari F8. With a torque converter automatic, the M3 is a cinch to launch. Put the transmission in its most aggressive manual mode, turn off stability control, put both feet in for a second or 3 to allow it to build boost, and it will tell you when it's ready. Then you just lift off the brake and it will spin all 4 tires as it rockets to 60 miles an hour in just 2.8 seconds, doing something very few cars can do, keeping up with a Tesla. For perspective, its 2.8 second run to 60 is just a fraction of a second behind multi-million-dollar cars with badges that say things like Bugatti. Closely spaced gearing keeps this monster engine right in its plateau of peak horsepower. Yes, you heard that right, which lasts from 6,250 to 7,200 RPM. Keep an eye on the dash and you'll see it just about peg its 29 PSI boost gauge. It's just nuts. You know what's also nuts? This thing damn near matched the time set by Max Splatterson, our dearly departed friend, who we threw out of a plane against his will for the purpose of this show. Maybe that's what everyone means when they keep saying BMW is in free fall these days, because this M3 CS probably wouldn't have been much faster if you threw it out of a plane. Finally, an electric car loses a drag race. Haha. It must be said, there is no cheaper way to get a quarter mile away from a sleazy new car salesman in 11 seconds. And the Model 3 ain't slowing down at the end of the run like your grandpappy's EV used to. Its 122 mile an hour trap speed might be a couple miles an hour behind the BMW's, but it's not like it jumped off the line and then had its acceleration fade away at highway speeds. Nope, that just doesn't happen anymore. The Tesla launches hard and stays right behind the BMW with just 0.02 of a second between them at the 60 mark. But the Model 3 can't quite keep up with that monster M3, and it winds up a bit more than a car length behind the Bimmer by the end of the quarter. The Tesla's run to 60 is also 2.8 seconds, and it's probably also traction limited just like the BMW's. But its traction control is so unbelievably good that humans can't actually feel it working. It's a quick getaway every time, no launch control needed, just at the pedal, and it F's right the F off. And in last place, it's the car with the most horsepower. And the most weight. And look, it's not like the C63 AMG is slow. No. That 11.2 second run matches the Dodge Challenger Demon 170. Or a Porsche Carrera GT. That is not slow. It's just the other two are quicker. Despite an easy-to-activate launch control that gives the AMG the ability to pre-spool the turbo and then drop the clutch pack, the C63 gets off the line less aggressively than the other two. Its extra 700-ish pounds don't really matter that much at these power levels, and so the Mercedes still manages to hit 60 in the twos. Each shift of the shortly geared 9-speed slows it down a little, and the 3 to 4 shift slows it down a lot, because it happens right at the same time as the second transmission shifts the rear motor from its first gear into its second. But that's not enough to explain the gap. Remember that this gas engine makes only 469 horsepower. And while it can do that all the time, the electric motors can't. They add 201 horsepower, but only for 10 seconds at a time, after which it drops to just 94. So it's at high speeds late in this race that the Mercedes starts to lose ground. Kind of unexpected from a car company, let's face it, that specializes in Autobahn drag races. Is what it is, and this car winds up 0.2 of a second behind the Tesla, 0.3 behind the BMW. And I have to ask one question, because we don't have an Autobahn here in America. Does it really matter what happens after 100 miles an hour? Your local car insurance company might say no. Have you ever looked at your car's trip computer and realized that despite your best efforts to lose your license, your lifetime average speed is like 28 miles an hour? Well, then clearly you don't need a Valentine 1 radar locator, because you don't need to find the radar before it finds you. While we're talking about fantasy versus reality, let's talk about real-world acceleration versus being here on a test track with launch control and weather-corrected conditions. If you're wondering why Mercedes built in all of this complexity just to lose a drag race, it's because there's only one thing that matters in the real world, and that's response. Oh, and knowing where the police are, obviously. Getting 235 horsepower per liter out of a combustion engine without revving it to 12,000 RPM means huge boost. And that means a big turbo. Without trickery, that Mercedes and its enormous turbo would be the laggiest car in the world. However, it has an electric motor acting directly on the rear axle, and its huge turbo is actually spun up electrically. And so the car responds far more quickly than, say, a traditional twin-turbo setup like this BMW M3. Why is this important? Well, we're about to show you, because we're going to rerun this drag race. But unlike the last time, the combustion cars aren't going to have launch control active. We're just all going to flat foot our right pedal, just as we would if the light turned green. And I think this is going to be a very different race. Bye Tesla, bye Mercedes. Can we reel in the Mercedes? Maybe. Just as we go past the line, maybe. Right there. Electrons for the win, at least in the real world. This was a very telling demonstration of the importance of launch control. Under those conditions, the BMW and Tesla are practically even, but this time, the BMW was left for absolute dead. The Model 3 left the chat, dropped its mic, and remained so far ahead that the M3 wouldn't have caught it if that straight 6 suddenly developed another 200 horsepower, which wouldn't surprise us. Same story with the Mercedes. 201 instant electric horsepowers at the back means it leapt right off the line with its electric turbo spooling up a fraction of a second later. Meanwhile, the BMW's 2 regular turbos were left begging for air, not achieving full boost until almost 5,000 RPM in first gear. When they finally spooled, they stayed there, and the M3 CS managed to reel in the Mercedes right before the line, where they're well into triple-digit speeds. So in other words, on a regular stoplight drag, the least expensive car by far is different league fast. And a 4-cylinder Mercedes that weighs as much as a fuel tanker shows its taillights to an S58 powered twin-turbo BMW. That is not how anyone imagined this would turn out. The entire world has gone topsy-turvy because that EV is the cheapest car here, and it's not the quickest. And a Mercedes-Benz just lost a drag race at high speed. And then a BMW M product with twin turbos on it might have been the quickest in instrumented testing, but got left in the dust on a stoplight drag. This is all not okay. But there's one bigger surprise, and that's that fans of the compact sports sedan now can choose between all electric, all gas, and everything in between. So it might be a topsy-turvy world, but the world is your oyster. Who writes this shit? What does that even mean? What do oysters have to do with anything? That's disgusting. They're like snot on a plate.